My name is Oswald Cousins. I'm in the employment law group here in Morrison and Foerster's Palo Alto office. And I'm really excited about welcoming W. Kamau Bell to this presentation. He's a stand-up comedian. He's the host and executive producer of the Emmy Award-winning CNN docuseries called United Shades of America with W. Kamau Bell. And his last stand-up comedy special, Private School Negro, is available on Netflix. Kamau is also an author. He wrote the book, The Awkward. I'm gonna start this long because I don't have this title memorized. Apologies for that.
Me neither.
The Awkward Thoughts of W. Kamau Bell, Tales of a 6'4" African-American, heterosexual, cisgender, left-leaning asthmatic, Black and proud, blurred, mama's boy, dad, and stand-up comedian. And I'm going to go straight to the questions after that. That's a great title, by the way. And I'm really glad that you have taken a hit for all the blurs out there. If anyone doesn't know what a blurred is, it's a Black nerd. And it's the person who starred in the 7th grade science fiction club's remake of Splinter the Mind's Eye, which is one of those little books in the Star Wars trilogy.
Wow.
I starred as Luke Skywalker in the 7th grade science fiction club movie. So you've got a special place in my heart, Kamau.
You may outrank me with that kind of cred.
I like to drop that credit, but you throw out the fact that you're 6'4", so
6'4" and can't play basketball. The definition of blurred.
That's all right. I'm 5'10" and can't play basketball.
All right. We're together.
All right, let's get started. Right in the beginning, Kamau, I really first of all want to thank you for being here for all of us. I know that we've been trying to get a hold of you for a while, and I really appreciate your time on this.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to the groups who made this happen. So I'm happy to be here.
I mentioned your show, United Shades of America, in the introduction, and it's probably the thing you're the most well known for right now. So let's start there. What was the inspiration for that show, and what do you hope people will take away from it?
I mean, the inspiration for that show happened before I ever thought I could have a show like that, because those are not shows that they hand out. There's not auditions for shows like that. So I used to sit on my wife, then girlfriend's couch watching like Anthony Bourdain on the Travel Channel, or Morgan Spurlock documentaries, or Michael Moore, and all these documentaries that were sort of like documentaries, but where the person who was making them was on camera and understood that they needed to be entertaining. So like I used to watch those and be like, how do you get one of those shows? And never knew how. And then after having another show that got canceled, and becoming known as a Black comedian who can talk politically, I ended up in CNN's office, and they had a show that somebody had pitched to them that at that point was a different type of show, but it was a documentary series where a Black comedian would travel around America. And I was like, this is basically the show I've been waiting for. And thankfully at that point, Anthony Bourdain had moved to CNN. So I felt like if he can be here doing what he's doing, I'm not going to go out as far as he is. I will be fine here. So it really was like, sort of luck is the residue of design, and all those aphorisms. And luckily at that point in my career, I also knew how to say no to things and how to make the show work for me. So the show was initially more broad, and it was mostly focused on a Black man traveling to white places. And I was like, no, I want to travel to all sorts of places. And so that's where the show became United Shades of America. Yeah, and I hope that people get out of it that like, that whatever your idea is of America, there's a lot more out here than you realize.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's well balanced in that sense. But unlike Anthony Bourdain, who sort of puts himself in harm's way, he might eat something, go down well, it doesn't sit well. I think your show is a little scary in that you actually are putting yourself potentially in harm's way. I don't know what your security detail is like when you're doing that. Is there one, by the way?
There's one guy usually who I've usually met the day before. So it's not like it's like my guy. One guy that I have to trust has my back and is a fan of the show, or doesn't know who I am, or is it mad at the show. I mean, I think I get too much credit for putting myself in harm's way. I'd say 95% of the show is me just sitting down talking to people about their lives. And even if I disagree with them, it's not harm's way. But the first episode was me with the KKK, so that will follow me for the rest of my life. And that show, I definitely felt like I was potentially in harm's way. But, I've talked to, most of the show is sitting down talking to people in very controlled environments, even if it's like somebody from the alt-right or somebody from a militia group. there are people who want to be on camera and talk. So I think CNN often edits the commercials to look like who's going to kill Kamau this week, but it very rarely do I feel like that's going to happen.
There's definitely a side of that element, I would say, that tries to make themselves seem more presentable.
Yes.
In fact, if you look at the sort of the local alt-right movements or the recent alt-right movements where they're wearing the white sort of collared shirts,
yes,
they have nice haircuts, so they're trying to act like we're just like everybody else.
We're just college students. We're just preppies. Yeah. We have boat shoes on.
Of us. We're like you, and so that's even a little bit more sinister.
It is. And I think the thing because I talked to a guy who at that point was credited as being the leader of the alt-right movement. But the thing that happened is once you sit down with them and go, okay, say all the things you want to say. I'm not going to confront you or throw a chair at you. I want you to just talk. The whole thing starts to fall.
Sorry.
No problem. Welcome to the W. Kamau Bell Show. My name is W. Kamau Bell. Today, our guest is Ossie Cousins. So we're going to wait for him to show up here in a few minutes. There he is. Now he's back. No problem.
I don't have a producer.
No problem. I mean, I'm in this office by myself, so don't worry about it. But so what I was saying is, when we talked to the guy who was credited as being the leader of the alt-right, his arguments started to fall apart the more I talked to him. And we don't really have the alt-right the way we did when I did that interview, because I think those people realized, wait, this isn't the guy. Like, even the people in the alt-right. And so those movements shift and change all the time. But yeah, I think that people often want me to sort of be more confrontational, but I don't think that actually helps us understand what's going on.
It's not always necessary either. Sometimes if you do let people speak themselves, a lot of the things they say, I suspect, sound great when they're just in their own forum or just speaking to each other. And then when you throw it out into the broader world, you realize, wait, actually, it doesn't really make as much sense as we thought.
Sounds great on Twitter, not great coming out of your mouth.
I want to transition a little bit to your prior show. You speak often about being a 6'4" Black man and how that visible identity impacts others' expectations of you. And before United Shades, you had a one-man show called the W. Kamau Bell Curve, ending racism in about an hour, which was in 2007. And then in 2018, you had the special we just talked about called Private School Negro. And so you've been thinking about and focusing on these issues for a long time. And has your identity impacted your perspective on racism, and has it changed over time?
Yeah, first of all, I think whether we realize it or not, all of our personal identities impact our perspective on the world. And America was built on race and racism. So whether or not you think about your race every day, your race is impacting your perspective on the world. I happen to think about my race every day because as a Black man, I don't know how I would get through the day otherwise. And also it's how I was raised. So yes, and certainly, I think Muhammad Ali said a man who thinks the same way at 20 as he did, same way at 50 as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. And so I think that my perspective has certainly shifted. A lot of that is because when I was 24, I moved from Chicago to the San Francisco Bay Area. And those are very different locations in the country. And in those locations, once I moved out here, I was hanging out with a lot of different kinds of people that I wasn't hanging with in Chicago. I learned the power of being quiet and listening out here in Chicago. We don't really do quiet and listening, but in the Bay Area, I think there's an invitation to do that. And so certainly I became more intersectional in my thinking, more inclusive in my politics in a way that I wasn't really thinking about when I was in Chicago. So yes, and I think it's important to, as a person who gets older, to constantly be evolving your ideas. If you're not, then I think you are wasting your time. And it's also important to take in new information. I think sometimes as people, we get upset when it's like, why is that the new word? I like the old word. But we have to understand that, first of all, people evolve and language evolves, and you should be excited about, a new word. Even if you get it wrong a couple times, you should be excited about the fact that language is evolving. That means you're living a long time. Good for you.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. I don't want to get too much into like the life story of W. Kamau Bell, but how long have you been doing comedy, would you say?
I would say I would know. I started doing comedy in 1994, but I was really bad at it for the first 9 years or so. And so, like,
were you in Chicago then, or were you out here?
I was in Chicago. I did it for 3 years in Chicago, then moved to the Bay Area in 97, and then started all over again in the Bay Area. And it wasn't until I'd say 2003 that I was like, oh, I think I'm starting to figure this out.
And was your comedy always focused on race and politics like it is now, or did that evolve over time?
That evolved over time. I think that I was always talking about race a little bit, but not in any sort of really developed way. I think I was just sort of dabbling in race. I was a race dabbler, as the saying goes. And I think other than that, I was just trying to be a comedian. I mean, I always tell people I wanted to be a comedian because of Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night Live, not because of not because of some political thinker. I didn't become a comedian because I was raised by the Black Panthers and I was like, I gotta talk about race. I wish that would have been nice though. But no offense, mom and dad. But so the idea being that like I just wanted to be a comedian because I thought it was cool, but I also grew up in a household where my mom was talking about race and racism all the time. So I think as I got older, really as I got older, I started thinking about race differently, and I got frustrated in comedy clubs not being able to talk about it. And so I decided to do the show, the W. Kamau Bell Curve, Ending Racism in About an Hour. And at that same moment, the junior senator from Illinois, Barack Hussein Obama, said he was going to run for president. And like a lot of people, I was like, that's adorable. Good for him. And then I think I started charting his path and then also talking more about race. So I think really his election really activated me in a big way.
Oh, wonderful. Did you ever have to make a conscious decision though, to say, okay, well, look, I want to have an act that's going to have a lot of crossover appeal, or I want to have an act that's going to allow me to just kind of flow to different kind of clubs and work different circuits? And then you said, okay, no, I'm going to start focusing on race, even if it's going to risk alienating people, or it's even going to risk maybe pushing me into a certain corner. Did you ever have to make that sort of decision?
I mean, I think I've struggled with that. I didn't make the decision constantly. I just sort of realized I couldn't do it any other way. So at some point I realized when I thought, all of my favorite bands aren't that popular. I think that's going to be me, a guy who's all my favorite bands are highly acclaimed and have hardcore followings, but aren't really that popular. And I was like, I think I can't expect me to be this big mainstream star when the things I like aren't big mainstream stars.
You have to name a couple bands now. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So Fishbone, Living Color. God. Yeah, I'm old school. So Urban Dance Squad, I'm going real old school. 24/7 Spies. The bands are getting smaller the more I name them. I mean, I think
Deeper Shade of Soul.
Deeper Shade of, there you go. So I think the band I like that's the most famous is probably Rage Against the Machine, which is a big band, but but also a band that was troubled and couldn't stay, was troubled by its own politics. So I think for me, I don't have bands that last a long time either. So I think that's for me, I looking at that. But I was early on, I was just trying to be a comedian. I wanted to be on Saturday Night Live, just like every other comedian wanted to be on Saturday Night Live. And at some point I realized that's not working. And the path I'm on is not going to get me to Saturday Night Live. Well, what do I want to do? And that's when I was like, well, I'd like to talk about race and racism a lot more and really be in depth. And so then I started renting theaters in San Francisco and just sort of at that point realizing this is the best work I've ever done. I'm the happiest doing this work. People are actually paying attention to me in a new way. I don't know if it's going to make me famous or rich, but I'm at least doing good work. And so I just think I started to pursue that and sort of assumed something will come out of this,
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I have a Fishbone story, which you've probably been in this situation a lot. It's probably like early 90s there. I was in Syracuse, New York, and I saw them in this little bar, and I was literally the only Black person in the bar.
Yeah. I've often said
there's no Fishbone. It's an all Black band.
Yes. Yeah. There's at that point, it was probably 10 people on stage in the band.
Yeah. And it worked to my advantage because I was actually standing in this spot that I thought was a great spot. Like I could see I was right next to the stage. I could see it. And I noticed that other people would sort of stand there and the bar bouncers would move them away. Mm-hmm. And it dawned on me, they thought I was with the band. They thought I was like some helper. I was like, fine, I'll just ride this out.
Yeah, there you go. Sometimes
that worked to my advantage too. When I went to the University of Vermont and there was a show, a reggae show at some ski town, like a ski bar. And I went up and bought pitchers of beers for my friends. And they just kind of waved me off. Like they gave me the beers and they thought just, again, I must be with the band. Why else would I be in this bar? But
yeah, I think that's, what is it? One out of 99 times racism works for you in a good way.
Yeah, 1 out of 99. But let's talk about your stating about traveling to the United States. You mentioned this before, has opened up your idea of what America is. And has it actually changed your impression of America as well doing that show, United Shades of America?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've become aware of, and I became aware of it very early in the show, because we did an episode in Chicago that was ostensibly about gang violence. And then we did an episode in Appalachia that was ostensibly about coal miners trying to figure out what to do now that the coal mines were closing. And in both those situations, and also the coal mine, the Appalachia show was right before the 2016 election. So there were Trump signs everywhere, Hillary for prison signs everywhere. Southside Chicago, they didn't really think any president was coming to help them, but it was certainly Barack Obama territory. But the idea being that both the ex-coal miners in Appalachia and the black people in Southside Chicago wanted the same thing: better jobs, better schools for their kids. They were both dealing with issues of drugs infecting their communities. They want the same thing. So for me, once you step out of the team sports of politics, and I found this I can sit down with people who ostensibly disagree with me, but we can have conversations about how to get the places we want to get to, and those are similar places. So to me, a lot of America, and we're in the middle of the Super Bowl of politics right now. We think of politics as such a team sport, and like, I like this team, I like this team. But really, if you took away the team sports of politics, we all want the same things. There are certain nuances based on where we live in the country, and certainly our cultural differences, but generally we want the same things.
Yeah.
Even if you think of something like defund the police, and if that scares you when you hear the words defund the police, what that is saying is like, I want to feel better taken care of by my community. I want the police forces community to make me feel safer and not less safe. We all want that.
Good point. What about the direction of the show in general? Have you been able to establish more creative control over time as you've been on the show?
Yes. I mean, it's funny. We talked about the KKK episode. That episode, I was the only Black person. It was like you at the Fishbone concert. I was the only Black person on the show who was in sort of any sort of producer, directing, sort of decision-making role. And I didn't really have the showrunner at the time, wouldn't really let me get any control over the edit. He wouldn't let me do things I wanted to do because he thought he had it. So when I look at that show, it's a little bit like looking at like pictures of you in high school wearing the jacket you thought was cool, but now is not cool. Although at the time I was like, I didn't want to wear the jacket. So like, it's like looking at the thing like, I never liked that jacket. Why am I wearing that jacket? It's like looking at the jacket your mom bought you.
How are you able to assert more control? How are you able to start to stand up for yourself?
It's funny. Somebody sent me an article, my manager at the time sent me an article during that first season about how when Roseanne got her first TV show, the big show that blew her up, that she was also not in control of the show, even though it was allegedly based on her life, but the showrunner would not let her have decisions. And so she sort of told herself, if this show's a hit, she had on the back of her door, apparently she had pictures of all the people she was going to fire. And so I really had that thing too of like, if this show gets any traction at all, I'm going to demand to do it differently. So I told myself after the show, it was clear the show was coming back for the second season, that I wouldn't come back unless certain changes were made, which the show, I was not, like, let's be clear, it's the first season of a TV show. I was not independently wealthy. There was not, I needed the job, but I told myself, and I talked to my wife about it and she understood, I will not come back unless certain changes are made. And then every season, luckily, as I've gotten more power, because the show's been doing better and it's won some awards, I don't have to make that kind of like, I don't have to draw that line in the sand. I just have to say, I would like more of this and more of this. And, so every season, the show got blacker and got more people of color on it. And the research got better because I wouldn't do it a different way. So I think it's about like really knowing what you will and won't do for your own success. And sometimes you have to eat it a little bit and you have to go, all right, I don't want to do this, but I'll eat it for now. But really making sure that you are able to draw a line in the sand and say, if this doesn't happen, I won't go forward. And that's what I was able to do.
Good for you. That's good. Do you have any suggestions for other people who are starting out in their career? Because there's always those points when you have to decide, well, I want to break in, I want to do something, but you have to, draw that line. Do you have any suggestions for people who want to get into entertainment or any kind of career? How do you draw those lines, and how do you make sure?
I mean, I think the first thing I would say is you have to make sure you're your own harshest critic. I think you have to make sure that you know what you're doing wrong before somebody else tells you what you're doing wrong. But if somebody, and also you have to be willing to take feedback even when it hurts. Like, it doesn't mean sometimes feedback comes in and it hurts and it's wrong. And you can also, you have to be able to distinguish that. But I think you have to, for me, I've always been my own harshest critic. So when somebody was like with the KKK episode, a lot of times Black people are like, I wouldn't even watch that. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. I was there. I can't be mad at you for not watching it because I don't know if it's actually that good. But I would say that the thing is that, by being my own harshest critic, I'm always thinking about how do I make this better? Doesn't mean you shouldn't also be a cheerleader for yourself. You should love what you do, but you should also have some, it's good to sort of have a list of goals in mind of where do you want to be in 5 years. Not that you'll be there, but just to sort of remind yourself you shouldn't always settle for where you're at. And I think certainly as a person of color, you have to be aware of sometimes as a Black person, person of color, indigenous person, you have to be aware that like we are operating in a system that doesn't support us. So that means sometimes, as I did with that first season of United Shades, you have to sort of swallow it and go, this is not what I want. This is not how I'd like it to be. But set those goals so that when the opportunity comes, you can go, okay, if I'm going to go forward, I will not go forward unless these things happen. That's the hardest thing is like, because not everybody's in a position to say, I will turn this job down. And I understand that. I'm not here to call anybody any sort of like thing for saying if they have to take the job because they need the job. But I do think that like getting to a point where you can say, I will not go forward unless these demands are met, I think is an important place to get to. But for me, again, I started in 94. I didn't get to that place until 2017.
Oh, wow.
So don't waste as much time as I did would be my last advice.
Hey, time's going to go by. So you got to get to where you are somehow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about we talked about your shift or how your comedy evolved. And let's just talk about comedy a little bit in general. In the world of Black comedy, I mean, I'm actually struggling right now to think of any Black comedians who don't have a strong racial component to their acts, like right now. It's just kind of hard to maybe. I
mean, I would say, it's funny. I think that you can't help. Let's think of somebody like Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart has said explicitly that he plans on being a billionaire. And I think he's probably going to make it there. When I turn on Kevin Hart, I think whether he certainly relates to a Black audience, but he's not going to be a billionaire off the strength of Black dollars.
Yeah.
So I don't think, but he's also going to talk about growing up in Philly. And if he's going to talk about growing up in Philly, it automatically comes from a Black perspective.
Yeah.
But he's not a guy who's on stage, like I would say, as some sort of like race warrior. And I don't mean that critically or not. I'm saying that he's just talking about his life. His life happens to be Black. That means the characters in his life are Black. But I would say that Kevin Hart is still the biggest comedian in this country. And is not.
That's actually good. I didn't even think of Kevin Hart. I don't know.
See, that's because he's so ubiquitous that we sort of think of like Chappelle and Chris Rock as Black comedians, but Kevin Hart is just a comedian. You know what I mean? But I would say that Kevin Hart is an example of someone who is like I said, he stated explicitly he's going to be a billionaire, and he probably will be.
Yeah. Now along those lines, though, there's like a line that comedians have to walk, and I was telling someone this story the other day about comedy is when I was a kid, Good Times was on. Yep. Remember?
Oh yeah.
And that's a show you look back at it now, and there's these very strong depictions of powerful Black women and strong Black father figures, that kind of thing. But it also had Jimmy Walker as JJ.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of those characters, I think, depending on your perspective, could come across in different ways. And I remember I was a little kid, and we're in school, and my friends and I, we loved Jimmy Walker. I mean, he was definitely
he's the breakout star.
And we're doing the dynamite stuff and jumping around and doing his little dance. And the teacher saw us doing that and thought it was really funny. So she had us like doing it for the whole class.
Mm.
And I got home and just for perspective, there weren't a lot of Black kids in the class. And the teacher wasn't Black. And I get home and I'm all excited. I tell my mom about this, and she was so mad.
Yeah, it's funny. I was like, I don't think your teacher was Black when you told me this. Yeah. And
there's that line between sort of being a comedian, a Black comedian, and then also sort of be doing the stage thing where it's, I don't want to call it minstrelry or whatever you want.
Minstrelsy. I mean, I think I would say it comes out of minstrelsy, though. Yeah. Minstrelsy. It's a hard word to say, apparently. Minstrelsy, especially this early in the morning without my coffee. But so yeah, I think the thing that a lot of Black people are aware of is that the history of Black people getting into entertainment is through being minstrels. And if you look at somebody like Stepin Fetchit, which is one of the biggest stars in the early days of Hollywood, is a Black man. I think the first person to make $1 million in Hollywood, or so. I mean, the numbers, the money would be crazy. It would be good now. So back then it must have been like who knows? You could do the math. It was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But the idea being that like that was the way Black people got into show business, was through sort of like being a version of Blackness that white people thought was funny and could make fun of.
Yeah.
And the issue then becomes, when do we get to be ourselves? Now, if you listen to Jimmy Walker now, or Jimmy Walker talk about JJ, I don't think he has any sort of sense of like, I shouldn't have been doing that. but it doesn't mean that black people can't look at it and go, this makes me uncomfortable. As a kid growing up, I loved JJ. Like I was like you, I was like, that's the funny guy. But now as an adult, I understand why John Amos, who played the dad, was like, I got to leave the show because the show was supposed to be about a black family. And now it's about this black dude just sort of acting like a clown. And so he left the show because he's like, I don't want to be associated with this. So I think in classic 2020 American fashion, multiple things can be true at once.
Well, it's like there's those two voices. There's that situation where you probably know this. You joke around, you'll say certain things with certain audiences, but you don't want anyone else to see that because they're not going to understand it and have the same perspective that you have. And I think Jimmy Walker, that character could have been that. He could have been a situation where, yeah, everyone knows in a black family, you kind of know the JJ character. You can have that within the black family, but you don't want people outside who don't understand that character to be looking at that and stereotyping based on it. You know, even if you talk about blurs, Urkel was a big setback.
Well, see, I mean, that's the funny thing. I think it's all about perspective. Certainly there's a side of Urkel that is like, shows a black person who's smart on TV, who cares about his grades, which is not something we had necessarily in that same way. But he also becomes a little bit of a clown, but also that actor clearly was aware of it. And then once he got bigger on the show, he's like, he created that other, we're getting so deep into black TV. Some people are gonna be like, what are they talking about? But the actor actually then on the show decided, I want to be able to play a different character, which is Stefan Urkel, which is a more grown up, more adult version of Urkel. So it's like, you can see even the difference between him and JJ is that Jaleel White, who's the actor, got to the position of power. He goes, I want to change this a little bit. I want to affect the narrative. I mean, going back to Chappelle says he left the Chappelle show because at one point he was doing a sketch and he felt white people laughing at the sketch in the wrong way. The white people on set. So we're still struggling with that. There's still ways in which black people in entertainment, because this is what Chris Rock told me this when I got my first TV show that he helped me get. He's like, look, like it basically, you're now a spokesperson for black people because there's not that many black people on TV. So everywhere you go, whatever you say, black people are going to be looking at you, especially since they don't know you yet, to make sure that you know what you're talking about and to make sure you know how to represent us. Now, so therefore I have learned through United Shades, sometimes on the show, I say things for black people think this, or generally black people think this, or the black people I know think this. And then sometimes you go, I think this. So trying to distinguish between the things that I think are generally true about black people, the things that are true about the black people who are my friends and family, and the things that I know that I think are just true for me. And I think it's important to do that. Whereas white people generally in this country don't have to do those kind of mental gymnastics when they're on TV, because there's so many white people on TV, they can be a thing I like to call individuals. So yes.
Sorry, there's construct. Can you guys hear that?
A little bit, but it's not that loud. It's all right.
I mean, I think it's interesting. Have you had to cut things out of your acts ever because you're like, look, I know some people are going to think this funny, but I don't really think that this should go out to the world because I think other people are going to misunderstand it and misuse it.
Sure. I mean, I think people don't understand with comedians, it's that most of it is trial and error. And so you may write a thing down in your notebook and then say it on stage and people may laugh at it. And you may be like, let me try it a couple more times. And you may try it 3, 10, 15 more times and eventually be like, I just don't like it, even if it's getting laughs. I mean, so every comedian is constantly editing themselves and going through a process of like, does this work? Do I want to change it? Is it in the right place? Do I need to rewrite it? The problem in 2020, or the problem in the current era, this is not just 2020, is that if you say it on stage and somebody gets footage of it and puts it up on YouTube, then it becomes locked. And you could be like, I was working on that. I mean, I think about like my friend Hannibal Buress, who went on a rant against Bill Cosby in Philadelphia. And that became one of the key pieces that brings down Bill Cosby. That's not what Hannibal was trying to do. Like he was like, I mean, I think he agreed. He believes in what he said, but it wasn't like he was trying to go, tonight I'm going to go on stage and take down Bill Cosby. But I think the fact is that we are in a weird space as comedians now. And a lot of comedians are now doing things like the bigger comedians, Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, where they will actually take your phone and lock it up during the show so that you can just pay attention to the show and not be trying to tweet out what you like or don't like. And I think it's funny, as much as people don't like that, I think it's actually important because it's like to recognize we're still working on this. This is all stuff. And also this should be the one place where you're allowed to sort of go to step over the line and go, oops, that was too far. Let me fix that tomorrow.
Did you know? I don't want to spend too long on Hannibal, but did you know about that bit or about about him talking about this before he actually did it and before it came out?
No, I mean I've known Hannibal for a long time, since before he
Yeah.
was known. Like and I when I saw that, I could tell, knowing Hannibal, that's not a bit necessarily. He's just talking. I mean, he may have done it. He may have said these things before, but that's him just sort of like in a moment in Philly, because it was in Philly. Him just sort of like having a moment with the crowd like comedians do. I don't think that bit would have ever shown up in a special. Like, I think it was just like, and that's what I think people don't understand. As comics, it's all sort of a work in progress. And also some things are just for that night only, you know? So yeah, that's not, as you've seen, Hannibal hasn't released a special called Bill Cosby and Other Icons I Want to Take Down. He's gone back to doing the kind of bits he likes to do, you know?
It's an interesting thing, though, sort of that relationship with our icons and our heroes. It's hard when they fall because there's so few of them. You know what I mean? Like Bill Cosby was growing up, when I grew up, was a saint almost.
Yeah.
He was
Although people who, I mean, that's true, but that was the image he put forward to the world. People who, like, and I've talked to people about this, people who knew Bill Cosby personally, I'm not talking about any of the accusations or any of the survivors, but people who just were around him said, wasn't that nice a guy? Like, you know, so, I mean, so I think that I think we should be very aware in 2020 that the image people put out into the world is not necessarily who they really are. And for that standpoint, I feel like we should be aware as adults, heroes are for children.
Yeah.
You know, we can like people for what they do, but we shouldn't make heroes of anybody. Nobody can stand up to that. Nobody deserves that. You know, I think that the more we know about people, the less likely they are to be our heroes, but it doesn't mean we can't admire them for the things they have done in their lives.
Let's talk about something else too, though. Another sort of side thing is the Elmwood Cafe incident. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Sounds like the OK Corral, the incident at Elmwood.
Yeah, but I'll say that's probably what brought you most of my attention. You know, I live here in San Francisco, and I've not had that happen to me. And when it was happening to you and you wrote about it, you did a really nice job of bringing that out and writing about it and describing the incident. I thought there had to be a moment when that happens, and it's embarrassing. And I've been in those situations where something racial happened and you're with a mixed crowd, especially. It's almost worse because then you have to deal with their reactions to it as well, and having to go through hearing them process it as well too. Which sometimes it's its own thing, but
yes,
at some point you have to make a decision do I do something about this, or do I just kind of move on and go about my day? Like, how did you come to that decision?
So I feel like, because this is a lot of people from all over the country, I think this call had to be sort of a little more detailed about the Elmwood Cafe.
Okay.
So, so it was January 2015. I remember it was January 2015 because it was actually my birthday. This happened on my birthday. Me and my wife had gone to a coffee shop in Berkeley called the Elmwood Cafe, which is it was a very new, fancy coffee shop that had just opened in an old established place. So people liked that space because it was this old place called Ozzy's Soda Fountain that was like one of those classic American soda fountains that now is the Elmwood Cafe. In a neighborhood, the Elmwood district of Berkeley is, you know, yoga pants, smoothie shops, like, you know, all the signs of the of property values being high.
Yep.
And so we had moved back to the Bay Area from New York like 4 or 5 months before. And I'd started working in United Shades. So on my birthday, my wife's like, I'll take you to breakfast. There's this new place, the Elmwood Cafe. Let's go there. So we went and had breakfast there. After, when it was over, I went down the street to a less fancy coffee shop to work on my laptop because I didn't. and then as I was getting ready to leave that coffee shop a couple hours later, my wife's like, oh, I'm back at the Elmwood Cafe with some of my friends. We had a 13-week-old baby. So my wife was having lunch with some of the moms from her mom's group who all had new babies. And so she's like, stop by and meet my new mom friends. And so I was like, all right. So I went back to the Elmwood Cafe. On my way back to the Elmwood Cafe, a bookstore that is directly attached to the Elmwood Cafe called Mrs. Dalloway's had a book in the window about the loving couple, a children's book about the loving couple. The loving couple is the interracial couple that got the anti-interracial marriage law struck down in 19 states by the Supreme Court in 1967. So I go, oh, it's a book about a family like mine. So I'm going to buy this book for my family. One day read it to because we had a 4-year-old too. Read it to my 4-year-old.
And your wife is white.
My wife is white. Yes, yes. So my wife is white. So I bought this book about this interracial couple that reminded me of my family. I go directly next door to the Elmwood Cafe. My wife is sitting there with our baby, the mom's group. They all are white presenting women. I think one of the babies is mixed, but the baby looks white. So it was a bunch of white looking people. And I walk up and meet my wife's friends. One of the moms says, "What's that book?" I show her the book. As I'm showing her the book, somebody knocks on the window from the inside of the Elmwood Cafe. And because I'm a big local celebrity, I look up like, oh, once again, somebody excited to see Kamau just walking around like a regular person. So I look up excitedly like, yeah, hey, yep, it's me. And it's this woman who works at the Elmwood Cafe. She's, I guess, the manager at the time, looks at me and goes, get out, get out. And I look up and realize that she thinks I'm bothering this table of white women. And she's telling me she basically, the way I read it at the time was like, scram, get out of here. And so then I get confused. And as I'm confused, realizing this woman thinks I'm bothering my wife and these white ladies, another employee walks out and basically gives me the definition of the bum's rush. Like, hi, sir, excuse me, I'm trying to fill this water. Can I, like, sort of giving me the, like, move along. And my wife turns to this woman and says, that's my husband. And she goes, oh, we thought you were, and the woman turns to me and goes, oh, we thought you were selling something. So they were trying to kick me off the grounds of the coffee shop, even though I was outside, not inside the coffee shop, standing next to the outside table, because they claimed they thought I was selling something. Now, apparently they thought I was one of those hustlers who sells interracial children's books on the street.
Well, that's a hot market.
It's a hot market. So at that point, I was like, I sort of said, well, no, I'm not. And this is you're totally being racist. I forget what I said, but something of like, and so I start to walk away. My wife gets up, grabs a baby, because she's like, we're leaving. We will never be back. We go to the car. And right before we get in the car, my wife goes back to the restaurant to confront the restaurant about it, the woman who tried to give me the bum's rush, and says, my husband is a black man. You're trying to kick him out of here because he's black. And the woman says, no, I still think he was selling something. Refusing to believe what had just happened. And again, everybody.
Does she not believe that you're her husband? Did she just?
She thought I was her husband, also a book hustler.
Oh, okay.
So they don't, and so refusing to believe it was racist. So me and my wife went home, thought about it, and I really tried to do everything I could to sort of make it make sense and to give them the benefit of the doubt. I wrote them a message on Facebook, on their Facebook page, saying, hey guys, can we talk? Like, can we talk about this thing that happened? They never got back to me. And then me and my wife wrote the blog that explained the whole story. And the reason why we wrote the blog was because I knew if it happened to me, if I was experiencing racism at the Elmwood Cafe, I was not the only person of color or black person who was experiencing that. And I also know if there's any reason I have this voice, like I've worked to be a person who talks about race and racism. I need to use this voice now, even when it matters, even if it makes me feel vulnerable, which it did. And it was one of those, it went Bay Area viral. Suddenly every news station was talking about comedian Kamau Bell getting kicked out of the Elmwood Cafe.
Yeah. Now do you think was it worse because it was in Berkeley, do you think?
I mean,
the expectations are higher.
I think the funny thing is, I think it's worse for white people to hear about it because it's in Berkeley. As a black person, I don't think race has any sort of zip code. Like racism doesn't have a zip code in this country. Now, how racism enacts itself may be different, but for me, a white gentrified coffee shop is a perfect recipe for racism. So, I mean, for me, it's like, it didn't surprise me, but it surprised a lot of white Berkeley residents who also really struggle with the idea that this was racist. They thought you were homeless. Well, but does that mean you tell a homeless person to scram? You know what I mean? Let's say I was homeless.
Because you were dressed like Mark Zuckerberg, is that why?
Yeah. I was like, I posted the picture of me wearing a hoodie, like an Oaklandish hoodie, which is a very nice hoodie, and a knit cap because it was a little chilly. And I was like, yeah, I'm basically dressed like every Silicon Valley billionaire in winter in the Bay Area. So yeah, so it was and then the coffee shop, there was a whole lot. We did a This American Life about it. If you want to hear the fuller story, you can listen on This American Life, called The Birds and the Bees. But the coffee shop owner, a guy named Michael Pierce, promised to do a lot of things. He accepted that it was racism right away. He wasn't there that day. And he promised to do a lot of things to change it. That was 2014. He did nothing. He bought a URL. That's what he did. He bought a URL that said implicitbiastraining.org or something that said coming soon for years. And then he didn't do anything. And then eventually the lines went back to being out the door at the Elmwood Cafe. And so it's a very common experience in America for white people to do something that is racist or be accused of racism, to make a lot of promises, and then once the heat dies down or the attention of America changes, they move on to their regular lives. And so that's why every time racism happens in this country, Black folks, activists, and allies have to figure out ways to raise the stakes, because you already promised that you weren't going to be racist again, and it didn't happen. So I think that's what we're experiencing right now with George Floyd, is like people in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, is that activists are going, how do we raise the stakes so that you won't just disappear and run into the shadows again?
Now, I sense that there's something different about the George Floyd protests, about the nature of it, and the amount of, I would say, crossover you have in those protests. In fact, my neighbors next door here in San Francisco, it's a white family, and they have all these children's signs up about like white silence. Like their kids have written all these signs about white silence and et cetera, and basically in children's scrawl. And I'm actually really touched by that, because to me, that's always the stuff that's going to make the difference. If you can get some level of understanding and buy-in and commitment from people who don't necessarily have a stake, have skin in the game right away. And do you feel that that's happening, or do you feel that there's something like, why are we seeing a difference with the George Floyd protests and the protests that are happening now?
I think because most of us were sheltering in place at our homes when it happened. I think that the reason why those kids next door to you were able to write those signs is because they weren't at school, or they had a lot more free time to do these things. I think if there had been no coronavirus pandemic, which we are still living under, I think that George Floyd thing would have gone down the way it normally goes down. Black people and allies would have watched it and been horrified about it. His name would have trended for a few days, and then it probably would have gone away. But it was because we all had the access to time and we also were all focused on the news because of the coronavirus, that you couldn't not watch it. And I think it was like we had spent so much time looking at the coronavirus numbers. It was like a new news story to look at. And we were sort of like, oh, this is something different. Like part of it was just that like it was able to take our attention away from the thing we were tired of looking at. So I think if that vaccine happens, which is a big if, or if we get rapid testing and able to sort of leave our houses and go to work and the gym and the movies and live concerts the way we were, and restaurants the way we were doing, a lot of people's attention will shift from justice and shift back to like restaurant reservations.
That's true. Let's talk about the coronavirus a little bit. That really has had a very strong impact on Black and Brown communities, probably a disproportionate impact, but it doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. Do you have any thoughts on that, or why it's not getting the kind of attention it is? In fact, it has gotten attention. In fact, if you've seen it early on, when you saw people sort of in the middle of the country saying, "Oh, it doesn't really matter to us because it's not really affecting us." It's affecting people in Queens.
I think one of the things I could not have predicted for America was built on racism, as we've talked about, genocide of the Native Americans and the transatlantic slave trade. So that was the building blocks of America, are those two racist acts. But I also thought we were built on science. Like I thought that we were built on, you can't build the building blocks of America unless you know how engineering and physics and biochemistry work, like a lot of that stuff. And somehow we are an anti-Black country overall. And now we're anti-science? Like, to me, this is like, pick one is all I would ask. Like, I can't do both. Yeah. But I think that, like, as always, because of the fact that we were built on racism, when bad things happen, the old phrase is, when America gets the cold, Black America gets the flu. Like, because of socioeconomic, the way Black people are socioeconomically impacted, the way that we don't have generational wealth the way white communities have it, the way we don't have the same level of healthcare, don't have the same access to healthcare that white communities have overall. We don't have the same relationship to our local politicians and our local police forces, because we are overrepresented in the criminal justice system versus white communities. Therefore, if bad things happen to America, they really happen bad to Black people and people of color and indigenous folks. And we were already sort of, as a country, okay to ignore those things. So now it's just another bad thing that's happening to Black people and indigenous folks. So then it becomes on people like me, who sort of feel a responsibility to go out there and try to sound the alarm. So I spent a lot of the first half of the pandemic working with a Bay Area pastor, Pastor Michael McBride, on a campaign called Mask for the People, which is just about getting Black folks in impacted communities PPE, just getting a mask and a hand sanitizer. And they wanted to raise $1 million to help those communities. And at some point early on in the pandemic, Jack from Twitter said he was going to give away $1 billion of his money to help fight the coronavirus. Jack from Twitter follows me. I don't know him. I don't know if we never met before, but I slipped into his DMs and said, "Hey man, can we have $1 million?" basically. And
Wow.
he gave Mask for the People $1 million. I mean, I'm bottom lining it a little bit, but that's how it got started. And so I think that that's why I feel a tremendous responsibility to, if I'm going to be in this position where people of influence and resources pay attention to me, then it becomes my job to connect those people to people who could use their resources and influence. Because
That's great.
depend on mainstream media. We can't depend on our government. Our government doesn't even care about white people getting the coronavirus. Our president doesn't even care about his family getting the coronavirus. like just to keep it real.
God.
Yeah. So then it becomes my responsibility as a citizen of this country to care more about the communities that I live in and the communities that I'm a part of. And even communities I'm not a part of. I'm also on the board of DonorsChoose.org, which is about getting teachers supplies and things they need so they can better teach their students. And I've been working with them for years. But right now during distance learning, teachers all over the country need better computers. They need PPE that the schools don't have budgets for. And the thing that I love about Donors Choose is that I do it for schools all around the country. I help support their causes. And I don't go, "Who'd you vote for?" before I help you. Like I just go.
So that's a national organization, Donors Choose?
DonorsChoose.org. It's a national organization that supports public school teachers from anything as small as like, we need pens and pencils, to we need a new tuba, to we need hand sanitizer, to we need snacks, any number of things. You can go to DonorsChoose.org. You can put in your own zip code and find out about the communities in the schools in your community, or you can put in your birthday and help teachers who have the same birthday as you. It's very easy to search.
This is probably a good segue to politics, since we started talking about it a little in the nonpartisan nature of Donors Choose. Let's talk about affirmative action. That's on the ballot here right now in California, and basically almost trying to re-legalize it.
Yes.
But the other issue is that the federal government has an executive order that they recently placed that bans the use of diversity style training with federal contractors.
Mm-hmm.
And in the absence of this kind of official training now, is there anything that you think that people can do to at least increase the awareness of diversity, or to stress the need for diversity, if we're not going to have sort of formal requirements that companies do it? And in begging that, do you think those things even do anything anyway?
Everything. This is all like a series of band-aids on like a trauma victim. Like this is America created a lot of trauma through how it was founded. So I think we always put so much pressure on diversity training and affirmative action to fix the whole thing, when really it's like, no, this thing is trying to fix the thing that is totally broken, and it may help a little bit, but it's not the whole thing. So I think people who even like those things maybe expect too much of them. So, but I would say that, like, right after George Floyd was murdered by the police in Minneapolis, you saw the New York Times bestseller list, and all these anti-racist books went up on the New York Times bestseller list. How to be an anti-racist, White Fragility, So You Want to Talk About Race. These books went up because suddenly white people were like, I need to know more about racism. Well, great. Read those books. Don't just buy them. Read those books. And I would say generally, as we're talking to people here who, corporate America, in your work, more information is better than less. The more you know about the companies you work with, the more you know about your company, the better prepared you are to be successful. And this is the same thing in America. The more we know about America, the more we know about America's history, the more we know about America's reality right now, for the richest white person to the poorest Black indigenous person, the better we will be about America. And the more we accept the truth of America is not the same as the myth of America, the better we are. So I think again, it becomes the responsibility of people like me and you who have a certain level of privilege to not let the people in our companies and in our groups forget these things and to demand that they do a better job. And it becomes the responsibility of white people of privilege to be, am I an ally? Am I a co-conspirator? Or am I just here for me and my people? And that's a really clear question to ask yourself. Do I want to make this country more equitable and more just for everyone? Or am I fine to just get mine? And I think there's some white people of privilege in our country who are just fine to get theirs and will tell you to your face. But I think some people won't answer that question, which means they're fine to get theirs. So I challenge everybody who's listening to this, answer that question. Do you want a more just, equitable country for everyone? Or are you fine to just get yours? And if you want a more just and equitable country, then it's like going to the gym. You have to do stuff regularly to make it better. You have to do stuff regularly to make it that way. It's not you don't just buy one book. You don't just read one book. You have to regularly engage and regularly outdo your personal best to make this happen.
That's interesting. And not to put you on the spot, because this is.
I'm on the spot. This is all the spot.
But if you were to give someone a top 3 reading list, could be articles, books, anything, or even just a source, a website to go to try to educate themselves and understand what's going on. Do you have any recommendations?
So there's a website called, if you look up Black Lives Matter card, I'm going to actually double check to make sure that I have that. So I'm going to do some Googling right now on my computer. Right. Black Lives Matter. Yeah. So Black Lives Matter card, and card is spelled CARRD. So blacklivesmatter.carrd.co. And if you go to Black Lives Matter card, which I'm going now, at the top it says ways you can help. And it's just, you just go down a list of things you can do. And it starts with sign petitions, text or call, donate, vote, more resources for protesters. And if you click on any of those things, it then has a list of things under there that you can then do. George Floyd petitions, Breonna Taylor petitions, petitions for more victims, petitions for law change. There's text. So on this website, there are things you can do. There are ways to connect with people. So I would say go there just to start, because people go, what do I do? Well, that's a great place to start. What do I do? And then so I would say go to that website and spend some time and actually do something from that website. I would say do more than one thing, but don't just read the website. Figure out something you can do to support people through this website. The other thing I would say is watch Ava DuVernay's 13th. I think that it's on Netflix. You all have Netflix, or you have somebody's Netflix password. Watch Ava DuVernay's 13th as a way to learn about why the criminal justice system is just legalized slavery. So I think that's important. I think I would say recommend that. And then I would say buy my friend Ijoma Oluwo's So You Want to Talk About Race. It's a very or you can listen to it too. It's a very conversational, funny, earnest, powerful book about racism, written from the perspective of a Black millennial. So you'll feel young while you read it. So
I think that's a good stocking stuffer for the Christmas season for us to send to all of our white friends.
Yes. And she's got a new book coming out. I think it's called White Mediocrity. So maybe get both of them. I haven't read that.
Excellent. Well, it was really wonderful talking to you. I could talk to you for another hour because I have a whole bunch of other questions, a whole bunch of different topics. I really do appreciate your taking the time, keeping it real for the Black nerds out there. And I wish you the best in everything you're doing. So, and that's it. I think that's about it. And we're going to wrap it up.
Thank you for having me. And thanks to the committees for having me here. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.